Okay, people. So I am joined by world-renowned chef, now film writer, um, Chef Ashwell McElveen. Ashbell. Thank you
Ashbel,
so
yeah.
much. Yes, yeah, I said Ashwell, didn't I? Ashbell McElveen. Ashbell, thank you so much for giving me your time today. I've just watched the film, which was so fascinating. James Hemings' Ghost of the American Kitchen. That
Yeah,
I'm like, this is all stuff I knew nothing about. Like nothing about, an indentured
yeah,
slave being like the, basically the founding father of American cooking and these meals and foods that just are loved all over the place. Like this
yeah.
is crazy. How did this come? Like, how did you find this out?
Well, I had done a dinner in New York City at the James Beard House, and it was a tribute to Thomas Jefferson and the Africans, in quotes, that cooked in his kitchen. And much later, I was really awakened in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, and all I could hear ringing in my ears was, "How could you, of all people, forget about me?" And I was like, "Well, what's that about? What's going on?" But growing up in South Carolina, I believed very firmly in departed spirits, in hants. They were called in South Carolina. And I knew right away that it was a departed spirit. And I understood clearly then after that it was the spirit of James Hemings, um, really chiding me to get further, go further, ask questions, and I, I'm not a culinary historian. I am a nosy chef, and I started digging. I started digging and looking. So who is this guy? Who was he? And um, and I discovered an amazing story. So, Ghost in America's Kitchen is literally the first in a trilogy of films about James Hemings.
Uh,
And and in particular for UK audiences, the tradition of Virginia plantation cookery has its roots in Hampton Court Palace's Henry VIII's Hampton Court Palace and their groaning boards. So the food has an English, Irish, and Scottish and Welsh influence at its base, but it
okay.
took the African ingenuity to say, wait a minute, this is just roast meat and gruel. And we're going to take this and make it taste good. And that's what they did. They added flavor and ingenuity. And, um, and that really is the base of the cooking that James Hemings took to Paris when he was there with Thomas Jefferson in the 1780s. And he spent 5 years there learning classic French cooking. And he fused that Virginia plantation cooking with all of its roots in the UK too, with a few other countries thrown in, and definitely a lot of Native American influences. But that's what he took to Paris, and he created a fusion that was half Virginian and half classic French fine cuisine. And and of course, it took Thomas Jefferson to weaponize that cooking, and and he was so good at what he did, and with his training, that Jefferson could invite royalty and the leaders of the Enlightenment in Paris to his table because James Hemings was the finest of chefs in Paris at the time, and that is the real impetus of a tradition of excellence that Black Americans have had on the continent, and particularly in Paris, less so in England, but definitely in Paris, where we influence um, the world, and not only enrich the French but the rest of the world with James Hemings in particular, when he returned from that 5-year stay in Paris. He returned as a master chef de cuisine, and he had to make a decision to return to slavery too, because he was free. He was a free man in Paris, but
Mm.
he chose to return to slavery. And I believe that he chose as a patriot. It's a much bandied about word these days, but a true believer in his country and the potential of the American Constitution. He believed in its potential, and that faith has been what Black Americans have used to agitate and bring the Constitution more to life, because we weren't included in the original Constitution. But James Hemings, as Jefferson's valet, was in the room. He was in the room when the Constitution was being written and debated.
Mm. That's
And
great.
when you start to think about that, it just puts your mind in a whole nother perspective, because you would think, wait a minute. You start to look at things very differently. And I took the view of really kind of looking at how colonial Black people may have felt in slavery and in freedom, um, and wondering how they might feel. And I took the stance of being in a Black barbershop on a Saturday morning, and you know what that's like. You hear everything.
Yeah.
Everything discussed, nothing is off limits.
Hmm.
And I was able to hear those people, my ancestors and yours, literally in a whole nother light. And it all made sense. I was like, okay, I understand now some of the dynamics of what they went through. And for me, growing up in segregated South Carolina, where when I am not of a tender age, but I went to school segregated by law, and when
Mm.
people hear me say that, and I said it to a group of young chefs, and 30 sets of eyes were looking back at me like, okay, come on, okay, now you're really pulling our leg. It's like, what? How could you have done that? And you're standing here talking to me. And I say, it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago. And I'm really interested in that whole life of Black folks in the African diaspora, because you have places like London, where in 1785, when James Hemings was in Paris, and there's some evidence that he actually went to Paris with the Duc d'Orléans, because the kitchens traveled with you wherever you went. You took your whole kitchen.
Right.
Your kitchen staff, all your chefs, all of the workers in the kitchen went with you wherever you traveled. And the Prince d'Orléans was a great friend of the Prince of Wales. And in 1787, he went to Paris, and And I believe James Hemings was on that trip because he was trained at the Chateau Chantilly, which belonged to the Duc d'Orléans. And in 1787, there were 30,000 free Black people in London. 30,000. I mean,
Oof.
that's like having lived in London, that really did my head in. I was like, what? Nobody said, no, what?
Mm.
Nobody ever told me that. Um, in the 15 years I was in the UK, and I
Well,
kept.
you don't learn that in history at school,
No, you don't. You
you know?
don't. And that's why I am so glad that this documentary is about us telling our own stories. So we're not relying on his story.
Mm.
We're telling our own stories, and that's the power of of our opportunities today. And I'm just firmly rooted in the debt that I owe, that we owe to the people that went before us, and what they had to endure for us to get here, and for you to be on a radio broadcast where you are. Oh, you're disseminating information around the world. How unimaginable is that for your grandparents or your parents even? That's the debt we owe.
Yeah.
We owe to them to do our best at this and
Well,
to this. Yeah.
yeah, it is that thing, right? Where it's the people before us that laid the footwork, laid the groundwork for
Oh,
what we do
absolutely.
now without the recognition, right? And
Yeah.
it was slow movements, right? It was like the
Yeah.
tortoise trying to win that race because things
Yeah.
didn't,
Oh, yes.
you know, I mean, James is this cook, but it's not like then suddenly everyone is, you know, sending their chefs to Paris to no, it's a
No.
gradual, slow moving thing.
Yeah. And it is so it is so important. I was in the documentary called Fries, and the famous American chef Anthony Bourdain, who traveled around the world.
Mm.
Um, uh, it was his production company that did the documentary on Fries. And when they had gone around the world and interviewed all these people, they came back to me and said, Ashbell, the we saved you for last because you're the only person that made sense out of how this French fries got disseminated around the world. And it was James Hemings who brought that dish along with macaroni and cheese and French fries and French vanilla ice cream, firm ice cream, meringues, and whipped cream. And the pavlova that's so loved in Britain are made out of meringues. And he introduced that to America. And from an enslaved kitchen at Monticello Plantation, that dish went around the world. Those dishes went around the world. And now they're part of global foodways. That's
Yeah.
the thing that's so important.
But it's just what I find interesting is, right? You're the first person who's said, like, you're the first person I've heard this from, right?
Hmm.
And you must imagine there's other people that must have known, must have
Oh, yes.
known, but have
Yes,
kept
they
it
did.
quiet. And I find that's the real interesting thing, you know. And I think we've seen it over the last few years after George Floyd and everything like that, when
Hmm.
everyone suddenly
Absolutely.
came out and was like, we apologize for what we've done and we must do better and blah blah blah. But it's just like you're saying
Yeah.
it now, but you've had this information, You've had
Yeah.
knowledge of these things for all this time, but only now you're trying to claim that, oh, I didn't know, and now I'm going to do this thing. And it's like, it's this crazy thing where all of this history is kept hidden. All of this knowledge is being subjugated until someone like yourself shines a light on it.
Well, it's been there. It's been lurking in the background, and it's all about interpretation. Um, I scoured the libraries in Bristol and in London, and did a whole bunch of research, um, just looking at how the roots of Southern regional cooking. And part of my restaurant, Ashbell's in London, was to explore that that avenue. And I stepped back and looked at my own heritage, English and well, Scottish, Irish, Cherokee, Native American, and African, and all of them I embrace. I embrace all of them. And the fact that these stories are nearly erased from history is up to us to dig them out. There's a huge community of Black culinary historians in America, and in the UK you have Andy Oliver. You've got Andy, who I've known for ages, really pressing the point. Is like, hey, wait a minute, this is what we've brought to the table, and the table is rich, it's delicious, and it's varied. And I'm going to be a part of one of her dinners um, in late November, and I'm hoping that you'll be there too. Where we're going to be sampling all of these different flavors from the African diaspora, and pointing out how they made their way into fine dining,
Mm.
and where they should have been in the first place. And that I am puzzled too, like you, about that erasure and
Mm.
an attempt to marginalize the contributions. And in America, there, the famous trope is from people that want to just revert back 200 years. They say, "Oh, it's woke. You woke," and I say very firmly, looking them in the eye, I say, "Oh no, I'm not woke, but I am wide awake to your crap." Okay, I am wide awake and I'm present, and
Mm.
that is the thing that we must, in our debt to our ancestors, who just endured and created excellence, excellence, man, in spite of the circumstances of being enslaved.
Mm. Yeah,
They did
it's
the best
crazy.
they could under the circumstances and in spite of their circumstances. That just really, whoa. I'd be, oh, well, can I slip a little arsenic in this for you?
Mm.
Okay. But they didn't.
No, and
They,
you made that interesting point in this in the documentary that you have all of these rich white people with their slaves,
yeah,
who they didn't treat well, but
yeah,
entrusted the cooking of their food.
yeah.
Which is that thing, like as you said, it's that great opportunity just to put that poison up in there and
Yeah.
be like, right, I'm clearing out this family now. You know what I mean? And if
Oh,
they're
yeah.
having guests over, you're wiping all the but yeah,
Yeah.
but then the other crazy thing about that notion, right? About slavery and everything like that, and what we know happened.
Mm,
So we know, slavery, and we know, that these slaves did everything. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like that thought of, oh, well, Thomas Jefferson created these foods. And he'd be like, wait, but
Oh, yes.
but he wasn't doing it. He had slaves to cook. So how was it he created this food? And that's the insane thing about a lot of these things, right? We know all of these people had
Yeah.
slaves, and we know they had to do
Yeah.
everything, which would be the cooking and just all of that kind of jazz. So
Yeah.
then when a white person is then taking credit for it, it's like,
Yeah.
how in this day and age are we taking that verbatim? How are we not looking in? Because like when we think of all the lies that we have uncovered, right? That
Oh, yeah.
you just don't look at everything with like, you know what I mean, a magnifying
Yeah.
glass and go, okay, what's the real truth behind this stuff?
Yes. Well, we're discovering those real truths, and that's the thing. And it's the fact that you're disseminating to your audience this new bit of information that's not new, but it's being put a spotlight on, it's being focused on, and there is so much commonality, and I believe in what Nelson Mandela set up after he got out of prison in South Africa. It was a truth and reconciliation, and you've got to have the truth, and that's
Mm,
what I'm so proud that the film is starting that process. And a 1 hour documentary, Ghost in America's Kitchen, does not sum up the magnitude of James Hemings' life. And the follow-up uh, films that's coming is a TV series that's in development now, James Hemings in Paris, which
okay.
is the American Bridgerton. And
Uh,
where we don't have to invent the 6 years of Queen Sophia being on the throne and being, a dark relative of the Windsors,
mm,
um, uh, even though she was German. Um, we don't have to recreate that and to extend that into fantasy land. We have real facts and real people that are historical figures that weren't, well, let's just say that weren't um, the stand-up people that history has lied to us that they were.
yeah.
Okay, because we'll get to, and I decided to not write a book about it, but to do moving pictures so that people can see, instead of reading it in the book, look at this. Here's what happened in the American delegation in Paris in 1785 to 1790. Not pretty.
Mm,
Okay, not pretty. It just shows us that the quote unquote the white founding fathers were as fallible and as gullible and as painfully inadequate as a lot of humans are, but they've been exalted as these paragons of virtue and thought. And
mm,
I'm looking forward to shattering that real lie. It's just a lie, okay? And we can just have to talk about it exactly as it is, a lie.
yeah. Well,
And
no, sorry, man.
yeah,
You go. You go.
no, no, no. I was just going to say, but that's why the two projects that I'm working on, James Hemings in Paris and A Patriot's Return to Slavery, is all about that. And I'm happy to be working with Shannon Lanier, who is James Hemings' sixth great nephew,
Oh,
and Thomas Jefferson's sixth great grandson.
damn.
So
Okay.
it is ominous that we've made an alliance to tell these stories, and his family is involved, up to their neck in it,
Mm,
because
mm.
they're the ones who actually help to create, excuse me, help to create fine dining in America, and
Yeah.
that is another conversation. So that I firmly believe that this taking that cue from Nelson Mandela, where we gotta have the truth to have a reconciliation. So that I'm gonna be one of the ones um, sharing my table with people that I don't agree with politically, but or economically, etc. But they're going to be invited to one table so that we can do the one vulnerable thing that every human has to do is to put something in their mouth for sustenance. So that we need to sit around that table and view people from the point of point of view of all this is a point of survival, and it's the most one of the most vulnerable things you can do is to put something in your mouth to eat,
Mm.
and I'm looking forward to being one of those people that's going to invite everybody to the table, and hopefully we can start looking at each other not as, oh, they're fat, they're this, they're cute, they're racist, they're right wing, and they're whatever they are, um, or whatever persuasion. We have to, if we're going to survive, if we're going to survive, we're going to have to resist that tribalism and finger pointing, and which is when you really put the facts out there and people can start to decide for themselves and get more information on historical facts. You don't have to. Um, they'll know a lie from what's the truth, but you have to be able to get all the information out there, and that's what I'm trying to do. So um, I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk with you about this because your platform is influential, and it's about spreading that word. It's about spreading that word that we count and we matter. One incident from James Hemings' life that reminds me of the George Floyd movement. When Jefferson was appointed president by the Congress, he was elected by the Congress, not by the people, by the way, his first term, um, he sent his secretary to Baltimore, where James was cooking in a tavern. And he sent his secretary to tell James to come to the White House to be the chef. James refused because he was a free man at that point, and he refused to come like he did when he was Jefferson's enslaved person. He said, "No, I'm a free man, and you're going to respect me as a free man. And to any free man, you would write a letter of appointment. And if you can just write a few lines, I'd be happy to come." Well, Jefferson refused to write that letter to a black man, and he instead wrote that letter, a normal thing in colonial times. He he wrote that letter to a white French chef. But James Hemings had the last laugh. He stood up to the most powerful man in his universe literally the most powerful man in his universe. He stood up and he said, "No, you're going to respect me as a man and not as your slave." And
Mm.
that to me was the seminal moment and the power of James Hemings, because he stood up when he could have been suffered all kinds of consequences. He stood up to a president of the United States and said, "No, you're going to respect me." And he didn't hold a grudge. So he later went to Monticello and cooked for Jefferson that same summer, but he refused to go to the White House without a letter of appointment. And that endeared me to him tremendously. And I'm I take so much solace from the power of what he did, and the fact that he was half brother to Thomas Jefferson's wife Martha, both the children of an Englishman from Leicester, John Wales. Even though he had this familiar link to Jefferson children, he was the uncle to Jefferson's children. And in today's parlance, that would be, particularly in a city like London, that would be um, nothing out of the ordinary. Because London is that kind of walled city, I call it. It's a culturally walled city, um, where if there's a school run and a Chinese man picks up a black child after school, nobody in London would bat an eye. Nobody would call the police. Nobody would say, "Oh, well, why is he picking up that child?" Nobody.
Well, it depends what part of London you're in.
Yeah, well, that is very true. That is
There's
very
definitely parts, there's definitely parts of London I've been in that haven't been that friendly.
okay. And I granted that is certain parts of London that definitely wasn't that friendly, and I found out firsthand that you don't talk very freely in the barbershop. So I, I literally had was almost stabbed up, as they said. Um,
Okay, yeah.
Getting a haircut. Okay. So just like, whoa, it just talking with and that particular incident just reminds me of how delicate these conversations are, and you're absolutely right. I was getting a haircut and talking with older Jamaican men, and I had done a whole film series on food and culture in Jamaica. And I was talking about that and the food and all of this. And a young man comes in, and he, like all young people in particularly in London, they speak Jamaican patois. Okay, whether they're black or white, that is the second language you must learn if you're living in London. And and he arrives, and all of this talk and all of this gesturing and all, and and one of the old guys says, "Hey, where were you born?" So he says, "I'm Jamaican through and through, through and through." And I said, "Oh, you're British." Well, I almost lost my life. Okay, I'll put it like that. So I I understand very fully what you're saying. Okay, so so there are definitely parts of London that, oh no, that's not going. Okay, you better back up with that stuff. So um, I well, that's one of the things that endear me to London. And like New York, those pockets do exist. Of I I I call them pockets of extreme reality.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
because that, our overall wounding, which is something we haven't dealt with as a people, but that experience of forced slavery definitely um, has psychic baggage that's been transferred through the generations to us,
Mm.
and which is why I had the psychiatrist Dr. LaShonda Green in the documentary really talking about that very subject, and we also have to heal ourselves from that trauma, because it's a trauma that's been embedded for centuries in our DNA. It's been passed down, and
Yeah.
part
And
of, yeah,
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it's like, when you're growing up in a household with older generations
yeah,
who have come from certain experiences, that
yeah,
like certain things get ingrained, like certain
yeah,
mistrusts and things like that. So it becomes that cycle as well
yeah, yeah,
with that
absolutely.
involved.
So this is I am so thrilled about Ghost in America's Kitchen, and particularly being on Amazon Prime. Um, so that it's a big platform, and we need to be heard, and it's a point of education for all of us, and and being the mixture of cultures and races that I am. I'm literally standing up and embracing them all, and we're all coming. We're all coming to your house, okay? You can't have Ashbell without having, that Native American, and without having that Scotch Irish. Um, so that's my moonshine side, okay? That's where my family learned how to make moonshine, from the Scotch Irish. Okay? My father he made exquisite moonshine and incredible fine bourbon.
Uh,
But that has its roots in the poaching with the Irish.
mm,
So it's it's a it's a recognition of where things came from and what we did with it. Okay, one of my first things that I did a pilot for a show in Britain called Britain's Got Soul, and it was really tracing the southern roots of American cooking in Britain, and I discovered a dish that called Colin Brie, I think it is, in Scotland, and
oh
it's
yeah.
yeah, and it is a crab soup thickened with rice. And growing up in South Carolina, she crab soup in Charleston area is the pinnacle of fine dining. And so I knew that food, but the fact that for 800 to 1,000 years there were African traders going up the coast to Scotland and bringing rice from the Red River in Africa for that dish before it got convoluted and sent back to South Carolina and became something else.
Mm,
Um, and I remind people very firmly that goods and products were made in Bristol and Liverpool, and those ships left with those trinkets and products, went to Africa, picked up that cargo, that human cargo,
yeah.
and then went to Kingston, first stop, Charleston. South Carolina, second stop. And the same families that were dropped off in Kingston start cooking the same way that somebody in Charleston start cooking, and then on to Virginia, and then to bringing cotton and rice in particular from South Carolina, and tobacco to England, and of course from Jamaica and the other Caribbean islands, sugar, where you'd had literally. I was in Bristol for several years, but at one point there were over 100 sugar refinery mills in Bristol, and it's like what? How could that be? And you used to walk on White Ladies Road in Bristol, and I enjoyed it. like it was my pleasure. And I would start to talk to um, the white ladies that the road was named after, and I'd say the things like, "Well, how do you like me now? I'm walking on your road, and I'm telling you about all kinds of crap about your history that you don't want me to know, but I do know, and I'm calling you out on it." Um, that resonance to me, well, it resonated to me, and it's all one story. My own mother died very young of ignorance and racism, literally. But she was a working chef. She was a working chef when she died. My uncle, who fought in World War II, after he came back to America, he trained as a dentist. He went to university. He became a dentist. But in North Carolina, the state only granted two licenses for the whole state of North Carolina, which is it's bigger than England, actually, a huge state. But they only licensed two Black dentists. He literally took his skills into the kitchen and ended up being the executive chef at the country club where the members that had denied him the license actually ate his food. And so this whole story about James Hemings and erasure has deep roots in both the country's culinary history, but also deep roots in that awful period of enslavement and the joy of coming out of that. And to you and me saying, "Oh no, 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 we're not going back to that. We're not going back, and we're standing here in your face, and we're not asking for a seat at the table. We're sitting down."
Yeah.
That's who we are now. And I am so glad to be able to be here in this moment, to help to disseminate this information and to really highlight our excellence. And that's what James Hemings did. He represents our excellence. And when the huge hit musical Hamilton, which was a huge hit on Broadway and internationally too, and the Tony Award winning song from that, "The Room Where It Happened," was about the dinner that James Hemings created, but he was not mentioned. He was left out of the play. Okay. He was left out. The Room Where It Happened was the dinner that James Hemings cooked to reconcile bitter enemies, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. A person at that dinner was James Madison, and James Hemings cooked the meal. That is absolutely fascinating, and it happens to be the most famous dinner in American colonial history because a lot of things were decided at that dinner. It was decided where Washington, D.C. would be located on the Potomac, not and the capital of the U.S. would be in Washington and not New York City or Philadelphia. And, uh, and they decided how the debt from the colonial war with England would be paid. And that states would divvy up the cost, and of course Jefferson and Madison being from Virginia, they made sure that Virginia paid the least amount of
Yeah, of course.
the debt. Okay, and it's just so fascinating, and the American Thanksgiving celebration is coming up, and that's one thing I'd love to talk to you about because it all of this misinformation about the um, foreign invaders, the illegal aliens in the to the Native American population were the people that came in from England, and that whole uh, story of the first Thanksgiving and sharing the turkey and all of this. Well, it was Pocahontas who was looking through the bushes and seeing that these same, I call them illegal aliens, um, the original illegal aliens, were cannibalizing themselves because they didn't trust any food that they didn't bring with them from England. So they ended up frying up, somebody that died, and this has been proven by archaeologists. This is not just Ashbell inventing stuff, and she was able to initiate bring them food and say and show them you can eat this. This is edible. You're in a natural larder, and there's no reason for you to be cannibalizing each other. And
Mm.
and for the reward of that first dinner, what do you think those illegal aliens did? They
Not a lot of
went
good things.
they went and stole the store of corn that the Native Americans had put up for winter.
Mm.
That is the character of the first illegal aliens in America. Okay. You want to you feed me, but then as soon as you turn your back, I'm gonna steal your shit. Excuse my French. Okay. Um,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
it's something that we've seen throughout history,
Yes.
but it's
Ooh.
something that we don't want to talk about for some crazy reason.
We must. They're difficult conversations to have, and it's difficult for everybody. And a lot of white folks say, "Oh no, well, why don't we talk about? I wasn't there and all of this." I said, "But you benefited from that whole um, segregation system that was created after slavery ended. You
Mm.
benefited from it, and you must actually stop, and we all must stop on the side of black folks. We need to stop pointing things like you're a slave, you're a slave. But most white people couldn't even afford to even eat. Okay, they were so poor. So,
Yeah.
they weren't owning any slaves. And as far as, you know, the reason that I'm part Irish is because there were 1 million enslaved black people in 1790 in Virginia, in well, not in Virginia, but in the U.S., and there were 500,000 enslaved Irish people.
Hmm.
Nobody talks about it, okay.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about that, but it's a fact, and that's how I got to be part Irish.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
they were chained to the Africans.
well, it's that weird thing where sometimes one aspect is spoken about, right? So
Yeah,
when we talk about concentration camps and the
yeah,
war,
yeah.
we talk about the Jewish prisoners, but
Yes.
we know black people, disabled people, there's other groups that were put in those camps as well.
Oh,
But but but
absolutely.
but we
Yeah.
never really talk about those other groups. We only
Yep.
talk about the Jewish, genocide, which, I
Yeah.
mean, it was disgusting. It's terrible, but there are
Yeah.
other people that suffered as well. So why
Oh,
don't we talk
absolutely.
about everything, right? We
Yeah.
just choose to
Well,
talk about this one segment, horrific segment, but there were other, you know, horrific things going on, but we don't talk about them.
oh, absolutely. And during this time before England abolished slavery, it was the Pope that had the slaving license, and he granted it to the Prince of Wales. Nobody, nobody talks about that.
Yeah.
Um, we must, and I keep going back to Nelson Mandela because it's such an inspiration. I had an opportunity to cook for him when he visited Brooklyn,
Oh, nice.
and he came into the kitchen and he said, "Brother, that's so delicious. What's that food?" I said, "It's the food of poor folks, sir. That's what it is." And he just gave me a hug, and
What
I'll
did you cook
never
for
forget.
Mandela?
Well, I made a sweet corn pudding, which is a staple in my family, and something I'm going to be recreating at Auntie Oliver's dinner. Um, and We had bourbon smoked turkey, um, uh, traditional greens. I did a instead of just regular collard greens, I had fried collard greens, slicing them thin, frying them with olive oil and garlic. And it was another twist on a staple item in the American culinary, especially in the South, in that tradition. And I ended with a warm banana pudding, which was a deconstructed cold banana pudding with toasted pound cake, um, pudding cream, and which I warmed up, and I sauteed the bananas in brown sugar and rum, and toasted the pound cake, and served that, and that was a staple in my restaurant in London years later too.
Oh
But
man.
that's the kind of thing that he loved, and he kept saying, "I'm familiar with it, but it was all new to me. Things that I'm so familiar with, so new, so new." But that hug was solidarity in shared experience. And it totally electrified my entire body to just touch him. And, and I know now how useful that, that brief moment of his, it just with him, just made me realize how important his words were. We've got to tell the truth. We got to look at it, no matter how painful it is. It's shared pain, pain for the
Mm.
white, pain for the black folks. We've got to have that shared pain to reconcile and sit at the same table.
I think
That's
that's an
yeah,
important thing that you're saying there, though, Ashwell, because I remember hearing I think it was a couple of years ago, Greta Thunberg was talking and saying that
Mhm.
she wants to talk about climate change with everyone, but she won't sit down with Trump. And I was just like, if you want change to happen, you have to sit down with everyone. You can't
Oh, yeah.
cherry pick. You
Yeah.
have to sit down with people you don't agree with, because
Yeah.
how are you going to try and change their opinion or just come to some sort of alliance, some sort of
Yeah.
negotiation? Right.
Yeah.
And it's only, there's that documentary, I think it's on Netflix, about the gentleman who sits down with clan members, and he
Mhm.
converted so many clan members, and they
Yeah.
give them these cloaks and robes, and it's just like that, like those people would still be in that,
Oh,
segregated
they're
mind.
still there. They're still there.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, some of them are definitely there, but you
Yeah.
wouldn't get these things happening if you don't sit down with people who you might not necessarily agree with.
I totally agree. I when I was an on-air chef on the Weekend Today show in New York City on NBC years ago, and and I um, invited Donald Trump because I was new and I was just like, oh, stab in the dark, and invited him to cook with me because he owned the Plaza Hotel at the time. Well, he accepted because at that time he'd go to the opening of an envelope.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
just,
He loved being on
just
TV.
love the spotlight, and so literally we we taped the segment in the Plaza Hotel kitchen, and literally it was we did it on a Wednesday and my show was on a Sunday. So I was like, oh, happy, 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 happy. It's gonna be a good show. By the time I got home, my it was the days of your where everybody had a telephone recording machine. And when I got home, the machine was full. All my friends from California called me, hey, just saw you on with Donald Trump. Hey, I was like, what? So I called one of my friends. I was like, what do you mean? He said, oh, you're on with Trump. I said, yeah, I'm looking forward to this Sunday because we're going to air it this Sunday. And and he said, my friend Martin said, I just saw it. What are you talking about? I just saw it on TV. I was like, oh, well, I learned a lesson in how things work in TV. Okay, it is when it's a hot property, you sell it immediately,
Mm.
and it got sold um, to other news stations around the country, and it was a surprise to me, and of course, I just got the same little pay that they did pay me to appear every Sunday morning
Yep.
and cook a dish, and it was a lesson. And I always say I don't agree with the politics of Trump at all, but he did introduce me to Diana Ross, and
Okay.
he attended a party at my house in Harlem that the Canadian consulate was giving, and
Ah.
the tape of the TV show that he was on NBC, and they showed it and everything. I have kept that tape hidden ever since. I was like, no, no, because it would he would turn me into a Kanye West. Okay, and I know that, and I was like, oh, well, he couldn't do that because my mouth is a lethal weapon. He couldn't do that. I'd be reminding him of the days there when he hung out with Snoop Dogg and Chuck D.
Oh
Those
boy.
were his hanging partners. Okay, and yeah, you're trying to hang out with them now? Oh no, that's not going to happen. So, um, but everybody has a history,
Mm.
and even even that you might deem a disagreement, I will make a place for you at the table. I will make a place for you at the table. And it must. I'm firmly confident in the future. And that's what James Hemings had his hopes and prayers and his faith, even though he wasn't included at the time, in this fragile document called the Constitution. And he had faith that eventually, and it did, through the agitation of a lot of Black folks, and particularly Black women, we you need to give them the credit of keeping hope alive. I literally went with my mother to pay the poll tax that Black people had to pay to vote in South Carolina. She paid the tax so that my eldest sister could vote, even though she wanted to vote all of her life. And it was $12, which was an enormous sum of money at that time because a week's salary was $20.
Whoa.
And she squirreled away $12 to pay so that my older sister Odell could vote for the first time for when John Kennedy was running. And when I voted for Obama, I stood in the booth and I was in tears because I knew I was voting for her. I was casting a vote for her. And I stayed there for a good half hour. And they were like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." Because I knew what kind of debt that was. And I'm happy, Kevin. I feel like I'm made for this moment. And I'm here to tell James Hemings' story and my uncle's story and my mother's story and all the other people that's been nearly erased from our history, particularly our culinary history. And and thanks to you, this story is getting out. Ghost in America's Kitchen on November 4th on Amazon Prime is that first bit of, yes, this is us telling our stories. Yeah.
Is such an important story to tell. Like, why did this seem like the right time to do it? And what made you kind of conceive it in this structure? You know, this documentary, then a series, you know,
Right.
and then another piece after that.
Right. Well, I knew that a book was gonna be read by a few people, not enough, and even if it's a best-selling book, and I knew that the power of especially in this digital age of moving pictures, and I knew that once I accepted James Hemings' story, and I went to Monticello, and I literally stood in his footsteps on 1790s dirt in front of the stove that he cooked on, the potager stove, because they were excavating the kitchen, the 1790 kitchen that he put in after Paris. And I stood there in front of that potager stove with charcoal still in the hearth. And a young archaeologist saying, "There's no flue. Why is there charcoal in this? Was this some kind of stove?" Well, a potager stove doesn't need a flue. It just works with hot charcoal. And it was, a technology that he learned in France. It was created in France, and he imported that back to America. And it was used to make fine sauces and dishes that you needed more control over rather than the fireplace, because the fireplace is where they cook these enormous meals, and typically um, 4 courses, and each course would have, 4 to 6 different dishes in each course. So you had an incredible amount of food over 4 courses and an incredible amount of dishes and those variations. And that all came out of a fireplace.
That's, I mean,
How amazing is
actually,
that?
that I when you explained some of those cooking techniques in the documentary, that just blew me away. And especially
Yeah.
when you were talking about the ice cream in the pastry. Like, have you
Yeah.
ever thought of, with all of this stuff that you're doing, of maybe doing like a little cookery show of like James Hemings, like cookery, like meals and stuff, or just the techniques showing people how to make these things? Because I think that would be huge. I'd watch that. I would definitely
Soon,
watch
soon come, Kevin.
that. Okay.
From your mouth to God's ears, okay?
That's splendid, man. That's splendid. But yeah, I want to know how to make some of those things.
Well, I will. Well, that's one of the things we're going to be doing. But the his famous dessert of warm pastry stuffed with vanilla ice cream took me 2 years to figure out how to do it, because I kept saying, "Okay, well, then we got a fireplace, so okay, I know where he got the ice cream, got the ice to make the ice cream from, in New York City on a warm June day. It was June 20th, 1790. And he had to walk past the slave pens on Wall Street, which is now our financial center, to get to the old British barracks, which had the first ice house in America. That's where he
Ah,
got the ice from to make the ice cream.
oh man.
And I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, he's got a fireplace. So how in the world did he do this? And he did it by that one thing, meringues. He did it by incredible ingenuity. Meringues are an insulator, like a baked Alaska, which came to be literally 50 years after he did this dish. But he used that meringue as an insulator to wrap around the ice cream, which would keep it cold and insulate it, and then put the pastry on it. And I was at the dilemma. Well, how would he? Where's the oven? It's got a fireplace. Well, how would he do it? Well, he took 2 copper pots, and we know that he brought back copper pots from France. And when you turn them uh, on top of each other and put a spoon in the middle to hold the pastry, it's the perfect oven. And I was like, it took me 2 years to figure it out. And I was on a friend's couch, and I didn't stay the night, and we were out late and drinking the night before. And I just jumped up screaming at the top of my lungs. Oh my God, that's how we did it. And he comes right out, what's wrong? My God. And it was such a revelation. I was like, that's how we did it. That's how we did it. And we're going to recreate that um,
Okay.
on February 5th. We're going to be recreating that dish that had been made in America for nearly 200 years. Okay.
Ooh.
And we're going to be recreating that dish with Chef Kimberly Brown, who um, is an internationally known pastry chef, and also the president of the American Culinary Federation.
Okay.
Um, it's such an honor to be working with her, because it was the female students of James Hemings that went to the White House, that Jefferson took to the White House since James refused to come without the letter. But his students Ursula Granger, Franny Hearn, and Edith Fawcett literally went to the White House to teach the white French chef James Hemings' fusion style of half Virginian, half French that he created in Paris. That is so important. And we're
Mm.
hoping to do that initial dinner at the White House.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
yeah, so that because there's so much history there with those women literally bringing not only this recipe and teaching it to the white French chef who literally took that recipe in his catering company after he left the White House and working with Jefferson, and he used it for 20 more years as the pearl of his catering company in Washington. Um, but we're going to reclaim that
Nice.
and and put it in its proper space and honoring those women who were students of his, but also um, honoring James Hemings. And we're going to be asking President Biden to write a posthumous letter of invitation to be the chef at the White House.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, so exciting. And James Hemings deserves this due after over 200 years of near erasure on
Oh, totally.
the lies of Jefferson.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Ashbel, if you need a sous chef to help you on that day, no, I will fly out and help cook for you, man. I will do that stuff.
Well, well, I do. And then, listen, I'm glad you volunteered because I literally work with sous chefs all the time, and they're not necessarily the people that train in the restaurant schools and all of that. Just a good idea of how to cook, and I can tell you what to do. I just said it. I had a dishwasher once in Bristol because the chef didn't want. I was trying to teach him how to make a New Orleans roux, which is different from a French roux.
Mm.
And so he was, he was a young white chef and he was embarrassed. I said, no, that's not the way to do it. You do it this way for the New Orleans roux. He was like, don't tell me how to make a roux. Don't tell me how to make a roux. I know how to make a roux. I graduated from this school. And so he refused to have any of the chefs in the kitchen help me. But they
What?
did anyway. They were like, no, this is a stitch up. He gave me the dishwasher as my sous chef. And the dishwasher was like, oh God, I don't cook. I cook at home. I make omelets. I don't know what to do. I said, just do what I say. Don't think, just do exactly as I say. And literally, the other chefs kept running whenever the head chef had his back turned. They'd run to, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? And in true British style, they were like, we don't like a stitch up, okay? And in true British style, they were like, no, you're not gonna make him look like a fool. And and it was for the Gold Brick House in Bristol. And literally, when all these 50 people were coming for my tasting menu, and when they came in, literally, the first thing they saw was a huge mountain of bourbon honey chicken wings that went down blaze with the British. Okay,
Oh man,
and,
it just sounds so
and it
good.
was like, no, no, you're not gonna stitch me up. And I literally is like I just say, wake up early in the morning and wake your mama up too, because if you're trying to catch me out, you gotta get up early. So, but that was what we had to endure.
Mm.
And I just drew from that, and I knew um, that yeah, I'm responsible. People coming, they paid already, and I'm not going to let them down. I'm going to give them a taste of this culture, of this food, and of this history. And I'm glad I did tonight. I've got to say we couldn't gotten through it without without the other chefs going. We hate a stitch up. No, not gonna have it. And that was an enjoyable time for me. So
Oh, that's great, man. But it's crazy, right? So you experienced that there, and I'm
yeah.
sure there's a whole heap of other incidents you can probably talk on.
Oh
But
yes.
it's just like, what must it have been like for James?
Yeah.
You know what I
Yes.
mean? Because it's
Wow.
just like being this great cook, being acknowledged as being this great cook,
Yeah.
kind of, but not then getting the recognition in books, like not getting, the letter of invitation and the other racist stuff that must have happened. He
Yep.
must have
Yep.
happened. And but he
Absolutely.
still like taught the other chefs, did all of that stuff. And it's just
Yeah.
like, when you think about, the racist experiences we have gone through at this
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
so what it must have been like when it was so much
Oh
worse.
yes. Yeah. I I uh I know that James Hemings, when he took over Jefferson's Kitchen in Paris after his training, he he spoke fluent French, and Jefferson never spoke fluent French
Ah.
at all. But James Hemings could read and write French fluently, and he supervised a French-speaking staff of 10 when he took over the kitchen, and that was the kitchen where Jefferson had invited royalty and the high and the leaders of the Enlightenment in Europe. Then he hid the fact that he owned 600 people in America. That
Mm.
wasn't what he told the French, and because if he did, or if James Hemings had declared his freedom in Paris, Jefferson's reputation and Ben Franklin's reputation would have been ruined overnight, and they would have been pariahs.
Mm.
James Hemings knew that because he could read and write, and he knew all of you couldn't put anything. Oh, he's a slave, so he can't read, but he could read and write, and he could read and write fluently in French. So both French and English. So he knew that if he declared his freedom in France, it would have destroyed the credit of the young United States. So that's why the story is so rich, and that we couldn't possibly encapsulate it in a 1 hour documentary.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
that's the real uh, reality of James Hemings' incredible life, and um, I'm convinced that it was reported that he drank himself to death in
Mm.
Baltimore, which is a total lie because the the average person, man and woman, in all of colonial America didn't drink water at all. They drank ale,
Yeah.
alcohol. Okay, throw back a couple of beers, a couple of pints before you start your day because that's all you're gonna drink all day. So how is it that he was the only one that would die of an overdose of alcohol? How ridiculous is that? And
Yeah.
when you put it in perspective, it's like, well, everybody else was drinking too. It's just like, but not just drinking little cocktails. They were drinking tankards of ale for breakfast at every meal. It was ale, not water. That's what people don't understand. And
Mm.
And I'm convinced that when he arrived in Baltimore, he had the finest clothes in the world. His boots were the finest, handmade leather boots in Paris, and his shirts were fine because he loved his clothes. And I am convinced that he was murdered for his clothes. Okay, even the richest men and women in Baltimore in 1803 could not even afford to buy a shirt, one shirt that James Hemings brought back from Paris. And to have him walk around as a free man, dress better than the richest white women in Baltimore, men and women in Baltimore, was was definitely a target. He was a target, okay? And I firmly believe that somewhere we're gonna find a cache of his writings because clearly he wrote down his recipes and the techniques that the French were so stodgy about. And they insisted that you write down the techniques because they were so complicated
Mm.
that you had to write them down. And I'm sure that on the Antiques Roadshow or similar show, we're gonna one day discover a cache of his writings.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, I firmly believe that, and there's no way that I would believe that he committed suicide.
No,
Absolutely,
well, I mean, we have so many incidents, through history
yeah,
where, and especially, in segregation times, and you know,
yeah,
where black people were killed and it was covered up, or
oh,
the
absolutely,
reason is given as something crazy. And I was just reading the other day, there was a gentleman who's just been released from jail, and
hmm
they found, like, he was accused of well, not attempted murder and rape, and
hmm
he denied it, and they found some DNA in 2000, and they
yeah,
refused to try it. And
yeah,
he only got it. They finally, through a load of intervention, they tested the DNA in 2019,
hmm
and then they discovered there he was innocent. But he'd been in jail for, I think they said something like, I think 48 years, something
yes,
ridiculous.
and,
And
and
there's so
yeah,
many of these incidents. So yeah, and when you think about your experience in Bristol, where the
yeah,
chef didn't want to learn from you, right? So
yeah,
if James Hemingway is looking dapper, dapper and fly, he's
yeah,
also cooking all these meals. He can speak two languages. There's
yeah,
definitely people that are gonna be like, nah, nah,
yeah,
not up in here.
absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree, and that's why I'm so adamant that we need to all see this playing out in moving pictures, and
Mm.
I because that's going to be really the thing that people are going to look at. It's a great tool for teaching history too,
Oh yeah.
and what you mentioned about you want to taste those flavors, literally what's in the works is literally some heritage food that you'll be able to make yourself at home,
Nice.
or just send us some dosh and we'll send it to your door.
Hey, well, hey, next time I'm over, I'm coming to your open table, actually. You know what I'm
Okay,
saying?
well
I'm
I'm
gonna
going to
travel
see you in London later on this month, so we got a lot to huddle about. Okay.
No, that would be splendid. It was interesting, right? Because I was speaking with a young lady recently, for the podcast, Vivian
Mhm.
Wim, and her documentary is coming out on the 11th of November. It's called The Last of the Winthrops, and she she did the documentary first, but she's going to be writing a companion book to go
Mhm.
along with it. And I'm sure with all this information that you have, and it's definitely, you're right. I think people would probably, you know, it's easier to disseminate that through the documentary.
Yeah.
But I think, hey, definitely, if you were to write a companion to go with that, you know what I mean, with just fleshing
Oh,
out some of the
it's gonna be
stories.
it's gonna be a companion, mostly food book.
Mm,
Um, and we, gonna have some historical points in there, but it's gonna be concentrated on that fusion of incredible American um, plantation cooking that has its roots in at Hampton Court Palace, um, all the way to going all the way to France with the native influences and some German and some Spanish, but taking all of that and he made a real world class cuisine out of it. And I am definitely in agreement with you that there has to be a companion book with it. And so uh, I am I'm working on it, brother. Okay,
oh
I'm
man,
as fast as I can.
awesome. Yeah, no, I cannot wait for any of it because yeah, it sounds fascinating. It really does, Ashbel. It sounds so fat, and I'm so glad that you're telling this story, right? Because I think there's a big thing, a couple of things you said, right? It's about everyone sitting down with people with differing opinions to you, which
Yeah,
I think is very important. But then
yeah,
I also always believe, right? You climb up that ladder, you get to a certain place, and you turn around and help the next person up. And
oh
part of that
yes,
is telling these stories, right? To give
yeah,
people because people talk about, right? It's, when
yeah,
Black Panther came out, people were like, oh, we can finally see a black hero, and that gives people something to aspire to. They said
mhm,
Obama became president and all of these things, but also it's the storytelling, right? It's telling
yeah,
the story of struggle, telling the story of achievement, of the things
yes,
people have done. And I think it's telling this story is so impactful, and it's going to inspire so many people and just shine that light on, wait, so a black man invented French fries, a black man invented macaroni cheese, right? Which I will definitely say, right? Black macaroni cheese is a lot better than the runny ass white, stuff a lot of white people do, right? I hate that runny ass shit. Nah, that ain't how you do it, man. That ain't how you do it. You know what I mean? So
no, that's not how you do it.
yeah. So it's
You,
so interesting that you're telling this such an important story. So, man, thank you for doing this.
thank you so much for having me on, and I really I'm so looking forward to sharing a pint, okay, and breaking bread with you, okay.
Oh man, yeah, I can't wait. There's definitely some cooking tips I'd like to get from you, man. But yeah, no, it would be just this. I really enjoyed this conversation, and when you've got
And
those
me as
next
well.
projects coming, please come back and we can talk some more, man.
Oh, I will. And thank you so much for having me. And I'm reminding everybody on Amazon Prime, Ghost in America's Kitchen is streaming in the UK on November 4th.
And how can they follow you, Ashbel?
Well,
Give
I'm on
your info.
Instagram and all of that social media stuff. I am fairly clueless, but they link it up, and I have people helping me kind of post things, but I write the post and they post them. So I'm not hiding anywhere. just just Google Chef Ashbell, and you'll see that I've been working for the past 30, 40 years, making sure that that you and your children understand that we have a stake, and
Mm.
and I'm proud of that. I'm so proud of that. So definitely looking forward to coming back, and I thank you again for your leadership of thought, my brother. Okay.
Hey, it was a pleasure, and I thank AJ for sorting this out because she always puts me in touch with such interesting people. So, she's done it again. So thanks,
Well,
AJ.
it's amazing. Thank AJ as well. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it was a pleasure, man. It was a pleasure. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
All right. You
Okay.
take care.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.